We produced our report in the summer of 2011. Much the most important thing we said is that the ageing of the population is a wonderful triumph and something we should be celebrating, and it's a sad world where something marvellous, that people are living longer, could be represented as something that was bad. The reason it is often represented as something bad is that the systems that we have in place to manage it are not good enough. There are two challenges in providing social care for older people, some slightly different challenges in providing social care for younger people, but let's stick with older people. The first is we have to have a system that will look after people when they haven't got any resources of their own that they can use. So we have to have a means-tested system that looks after the people who are most in need, and that needs to be properly funded. It also needs to be appropriately generous, and we had some recommendations about how the means-tested system should be changed, in particular that the level of assets beyond which you've got no support should be increased from about £23,000 to about £120,000. That was one part of it. But then there's a second challenge, which is how we can make it possible for all of us to manage the risk that we each face and plan for the future. In most areas where we're faced by a relatively unlikely risk, but that if it happens is big and nasty, we pool that risk. We have some form of insurance, either private sector insurance to protect your house from burning down or to cover the consequences of a car crash, or social insurance, as in the case of the health service. In the case of social care, neither of those is available. The state doesn't provide any care, any insurance if you're not down to a very low level of resources, and the private sector never will. So because of that, what we suggested was a cap that individuals would be on their own for the first X tens of thousands of pounds of care costs, but if they were one of the unlucky ones who had high care costs, the state would step in. We suggested in 2011 that the state should step in at some point between £25,000 and £50,000 of accumulated need. That was in 2010 prices. The last government legislated in 2015 to bring in such a cap in April 2016 at a level of £72,000, which was a bit higher, although there had been some inflation in the intervening period. So there were two elements to our proposals: a better funded and more generous means test, and then a form of social insurance that would avoid everybody facing catastrophic consequences of needing social care for a long time.
So am I right that up to the point at which the election was called, that suggestion of a cap had gone?
No, by the time that the election was called, it was still the government's policy. So the coalition government went into the last election having legislated to introduce both elements of our proposals, both the more generous means test and the cap. The proposal at that point was for the cap to be implemented in April 2016, just after the last election. Despite it having been in the Conservative Party manifesto, it was postponed until April 2020. But it was still the government's policy to introduce both the more generous means test and a cap, although it had been deferred till April 2020. So it wasn't until the Conservative manifesto was launched in this election campaign that there was any suggestion that there wouldn't be a cap. Fortunately, that suggestion lasted for only 4 days.
Now, in terms of the way in which the parties put their social care provisions, it appears that it divides into two. You've mentioned the Conservatives, and perhaps we'll come to them in a moment. But the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the Greens and UKIP, as I understand it, are talking about either some form of taxation or reprioritisation of government funding in order to fund social care. I mean, what's your view on that type of approach?
Well, as things stand, all three of the main political parties in England, Labour, Liberal Democrats and now the Conservatives, are committed to a cap. All three have committed to the policy that has been legislated for. They have different suggestions about where the money might come from to pay for it, some more or less clear. One of the big debates is, should money come from older people or from general taxation? I think there are arguments in both directions. I think it's not unreasonable to say that there are quite a lot of ways in which older people benefit from state provision at the moment, and some of those might be made less generous, things like the winter fuel allowance or even the triple lock, as long as the quid pro quo of that was a social care system that worked better. There are also arguments that could be put for changing the tax regime. I think those are arguments that will have to come back during the Green Paper discussions.
Now, in terms of the Conservatives' proposal, and one of the points that's been made to us by our viewers and listeners on Carers World Radio Plus is that the concern about being able to pass on a house, the family house, as part of an inheritance. As I understand the Conservative proposals, that would effectively be deferred till after one or both of the people living in the house have died, and then be a matter for the estate. I mean, have I understood that correctly, firstly? And if so, is that, do you believe, a viable way of funding social care?
Well, Conservatives are proposing something that's already in place, which is that if you are charged by the state for your social care, you don't have to pay that money then and there. You can wait and pay it after your death using the value of your house. They're extending the amount that might need to be paid by including the value of your house in the means test for care received in your own home instead of just care received in a residential setting. But importantly, when they first announced their proposals, there was no cap to that, so you could have lost all but the last £100,000 of your assets. What they announced 4 days later, when Mrs. May clarified, as she put it, her proposals, was that there would be a cap. They haven't told us what that cap will be, but that cap will set an absolute limit on the amount that anyone can pay.
In terms of what all the parties are saying, do you feel satisfied, dissatisfied, concerned in terms of what's going to happen after the election? Or do you believe there's sufficient uniformity between the parties on this that the matters should improve?
So I'm pleased that all of the major parties are paying attention to this policy area. I'm concerned that some of the proposals that have been made are either slightly vague or haven't seemed at first sight to be fully formed. I'm delighted to see that the Conservative Party have changed their position from the initial position they set out in their manifesto. There's still a great deal to be done. So in this area, which is a crucial litmus test of what kind of society we are, how we look after those who need care, how we support those who are caring for those who need care, I think there's the possibility of a good outcome, but there's a lot of work to be done in the months that follow the election. If the Conservatives win, looking at a green paper, if one of the other parties wins, then whatever structures they put in place, because it really is time for us to nail this down.